Hello, everyone. Welcome back to BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. My name is Alex Hokuli. It's Wednesday, the 28th of September, and that means that very recently, over the weekend, Italy held an election in which the Fratelli d'Italia came out as the leading party. And we're very, very happy to have joining us today to talk this through Mattia Salvia, who's formerly politics editor at Rolling Stone Italia, and prior to that was at Vice Italia. He's also the author of a book which has just come out called Interregno, Iconografia of the 20th century, 21st century, actually. And I didn't even say it in Italian as I should have done. Mattia, hi. You correct me, please.
Hi, guys. It's good to be here. And the book is called Interregno, Iconografia del XXI secolo.
Very good. Thank you. That's great. So all of our Italian listeners should absolutely check it out, though. I imagine they're already familiar with Mattia's work. He's also, I should point out, the translator of our book, The End of History. So it's been great to be working with Mattia, and it's long overdue to have him on the podcast. So welcome. And of course, George Hoare is here. Hello, George.
Yes, I am. Hello, Alex. Good to see you.
And Philip Cunliffe as well, who I've assured we are going to talk about the European Union in this podcast. So, and maybe even the possibility or not of Ital exit. So, just ticking off the boxes there.
It might even be important for Italy, to talk about the European Union. I know that's a hard and controversial proposition for you to accept, Alex. But
no, I think the European Union is very important. I'm just not a believer that it's impossible to overstate the importance of the European Union. But we'll get into that. I like to just start these off by riling Philip a little bit, kind of get him charged.
Waking him up, getting him, I've got my can of Coca-Cola.
I'm awake.
So I don't need riling up.
I'm woke. I'm here.
Of course.
All right. Very good. So let's get into it. We're dealing with a situation which Europe is in crisis, and it's not just that the storm clouds are gathering ahead. Everybody knows what's coming, and electorally, this is throwing up things which I don't think we can even describe as surprises anymore, because we know that any election that's held now at the moment will likely throw an incumbent out of office just because of the sheer difficulties that are being faced by everyone. So there was an election in Sweden, which threw up the right-wing Sweden Democrats, which maybe we could call it a blåbärssoppa of reaction. Our latest episode was actually on France, which was a cassoulet of disruption, discussing Macron and Macronistan, and how France itself seems to be in perma-crisis. And obviously today we're talking about Italy because, of course, how could we not? So just to get this started, how are we going to classify Giorgia Meloni's government? Is it a caponata of chaos? You can obviously feel free to avoid any sort of food references at all and just talk about the politics, Mattia.
Or indeed alliteration.
No, a lot of people seem to think that she's a fascist. Like this is something that I heard mostly from foreign sources. Like last summer, there was this opinion piece by David Broder on the New York Times, and more recently, there was another piece on the Atlantic, and so. This is probably due to the fact that the party is actually a post-fascist party. Brothers of Italy, it's basically a rebranding of the Italian social movement that was the successor party for the National Fascist Party. And also the logo is very clear about this roots, because you have basically the tricolor flame sprouting from Mussolini's tomb. So the aesthetics is very clear, but I think that these assessments are wrong, because that is only a coat of black paint that she wears over herself. Maybe she privately is fascist, but in terms of politics, Brothers of Italy is basically a liberal conservative party. It has to appeal to a very small base of nostalgic fascist voters, but that's not what's happening here. Like that's not 26% of the electorate.
Yeah, and I mean, so obviously, I think this question of fascism might as well deal with it right off the bat. I mean, you've already introduced it. And I plan to discuss it because it's something that is worth kind of distinguishing. I've made the point, in Brazil with regard to Bolsonaro, that I would probably classify him as a fascist, but it doesn't really matter because it's not what's inside his head. His government isn't a fascist one. And I wonder whether you can say the same thing about Meloni.
Yeah, I think so. She will not march on Rome, although the symbolism of her coming to power exactly 100 years after the Mussolini's march on Rome is very scary or revealing of something. But she maybe is a fascist, but she will not govern as one, because she is a career politician that always work inside a broad coalition of center-right, and she is leading a party that was very small in terms of votes until last elections. It was like 10 years ago, it was like 4% of the electorate, something like that. And so she has to, she basically uses fascist rhetoric to her own base, but she will be no different from Salvini or from Berlusconi. I think that there is a similarity between Giorgia Meloni and Salvini. Salvini too was governing in a very different way from the roots of his party, because the League was a regionalist party from northern Italy, and after it became like a all-nation party, it had to abandon his regional roots. It even changed its name.
I mean, I'm not sure I buy the Alex line about Bolsonaro being a fascist without kind of a fascist government, because I'm not sure it may, I don't know if and it's not like you can be kind of a fascist without a fascist movement or a fascist party.
That's sort of my point. Yeah, I mean that it ultimately doesn't come down to, or doesn't matter what's inside your head, what is the dreams you hold for politics. It's about what you do.
I mean, the other thing I would add to the Meloni equation as well is she, and this is so whoever was had the shots lined up, or whoever had the kind of countdown timer on. The other reason Meloni can't be a fascist is because Italy is in the European Union. It's not kind of an independent state, so it doesn't have the kind of, control. There isn't the control over state power that you would need for kind of the kinds of policies that fascists would wish to enact, So I mean, I think there's just basic kind of features of the state which are incompatible with fascism, at least as kind of classical 20th century fascism. But the other thing as well is just to add to it. I mean, she also won the vote, right, which the fascists didn't actually do. I mean, in both cases, both in Germany and Italy, it was kind of, fascists were put into power, levered into power by pre-existing traditional elites, whereas Meloni has won the vote fair and square. So I think those two things are also kind of important qualifications to the discussion.
It sounds to me like you're mounting a defense of the EU here, Phil, because it makes fascism literally impossible. And I'm surprised to hear you have changed your tune in this way. But no, I mean, actually,
that's the appeal.
I did some research in advance of us recording, and the definition of the dictionary definition of a fascist is somebody whose politics I don't like. So actually, I think Meloni is a fascist, and so is Bolsonaro. And so, are you, listener, if you disagree with this analysis? So, no, I think it's. I mean, I don't want to be too reductive, but I think the idea of talking about all this, is this person a fascist? Is that movement a fascist? It seems to me like I've made this point on the podcast before. It without the context of a militant working class that fascism could respond to, it's just not the same situation. And so using these old labels, it seems it's a bit of a, I don't know, you can see why people do it, but it's just not the same sort of political situation that we were previously in.
Yeah, and I mean, so let's return to the question of democracy and elections, because as Phil rightly points out, Meloni has won election. Her Fratelli d'Italia won 26% of the vote. But this didn't come, I think, as a shock. Mattia, you've even written that this very much wasn't a shock, and not just because the polls were predicting it, but even if you hadn't paid attention to any of the polls, if there hadn't been any polls indicating who would come on top in Italy in this election, you still wouldn't be particularly surprised, just because of this whole history of populist and nationalist breakthroughs over the past 30 years, really, or even longer. So, Mattia, tell us how you weren't shocked, and also, actually, were people in Italy shocked? I think that's an important question too.
I also wanted to throw something else in. Could you give us maybe a breakdown of who voted for the brothers? So, in terms of kind of what parts of the country, what demographics? Because I saw some reports about kind of how popular Meloni is in old communist strongholds. But just a kind of a broad brushstrokes kind of, picture of who voted, and particularly also if the brothers have picked up any ethnic minorities, or whether ethnic minority voters still go for other parties.
I think that it's still a bit early for like having precise breakdown of the vote, but you can definitely say that Brothers of Italy was supported by middle class, impoverished middle class, and some sections of the small bourgeoisie, and it didn't really manage to capture votes from the working class. But basically, the turnout is very low. But it's mainly the working class that is not voting, that is not going to the polls. Basically, what we are seeing here is a competition between two different strains of the ruling class. We have an establishment ruling class that supports the Democratic Party, that is the liberal progressive establishment, and then we have another liberal conservative strain of the ruling class, maybe the small bourgeoisie, the ones that are more hurt by the sanction to Russia because they work in exporting goods to Russia, or they work with German companies that are now being affected by the energy crisis. And so they turn to the right. But the great factor that is not there is the working class. And I think that is due to the fact that we had the experience of the Five-Star Movement, that basically was a big tent party that catered to very different social strata, but also it acted as the last possible vehicle to express political participation from the working class. After that, the working class stopped voting. And in terms of why we were not shocked, I think that it's more a fact of being exposed to the same anti-fascist rhetoric. I wrote a piece on Popula on this topic 2 days ago, and this election was fought again on terms of fighting against a fascist threat. This is the same rhetoric that we have seen for Salvini 4 years ago, and this is the same rhetoric that we have been seeing since the 90s, since Berlusconi. So at some point, you start thinking that if everything's fascism, nothing is fascism.
Yeah.
So you're not scared anymore.
Yeah, no, and so that's in society at large. That was the feeling as well, right? That this was not somehow a sort of breakthrough, an earth-shattering moment. It was just another event along the way, right?
But presumably it's worth though kind of specifying, because I mean, they clearly the Italian voters weren't willing to go for the League again. So what is, I suppose it's kind of. Could you tell us maybe a bit, Mattia, from inside Italy, what the difference is, or what the electoral kind of pitch was, how Meloni differentiated herself from Salvini? Because though they kind of they stood as part of a coalition, or in fact effectively will govern as a coalition. But I'm curious as to why, what does she offer that the Italian voters don't see in Salvini anymore?
I think that it was mainly a thing related to the last government, like the Draghi government, because Salvini's League was among the supporters of that government, while Meloni was the sole opposition party, and like people are like they don't really trust politicians anymore, so they are looking for somebody that is not that has not participated in government, that is still pure from that point of view. So they left Salvini en masse and went to Meloni, because she had never governed. She was always on the opposition.
Right. So that gave her a little bit of a sense of being untainted by establishment politics. So, I mean, it kind of is interesting because as Italy goes through a succession of right-wing governments, which then get, kind of deposed in some way or replaced by center-left or technocratic governments, it's almost like this is the last, it seems like this is the last lot to have their chance, right? Because you had Berlusconi and Forza Italia, you had the Five Star, which is not of the right, but is a very much mixed bag, more purely populist. You've had the Lega, and now you have the Fratelli d'Italia. So, I mean, there's a sort of grim inevitability in that timeline, in that sort of sense of just, well, here we go, here's the next guys. Lega come through, and it's a big kerfuffle over whether this, nationalist right-wing government, and whether it'll destabilize Italy, whether it'll take Italy out of the EU, and so on. And then you have the next step along the line once the kind of bottom falls out of Lega support, and it's remarkable to the extent to which it did, under 10%. I wanted to bring this into connection with something that you've written about also recently, about this idea of whether we're in the wrong timeline. And so I'm going to let you explain it, but I think basically the idea is that there's this a sort of a liberal concern, even kind of a hysterical reaction, maybe that we on this podcast have characterized as neoliberal order breakdown syndrome. I don't know if you would do the same about what we're describing, but it's this idea that liberalism wasn't meant to go this way, that liberalism wasn't meant to throw up these nationalist authoritarian politicians. And you argue that actually in some ways this is the right, correct timeline. So maybe explain that for us.
Yeah, that's the basic theme of my book, that we do not, in fact, live in a darkest timeline, in a wrong timeline, but we live in the correct timeline, because it was the social democratic era that was the darkest timeline, the wrong timeline. Like the timeline is now correcting itself. And I think that it's basically the same as the neoliberal order breakdown syndrome. And one interesting point is that this is probably due to the fact that liberalism has become the dominant ideological system. Like there cannot be anything else in the ideological sphere. Even Giorgia Meloni and the post-fascist party, they had basically accepted this fact. They had to become a conservative liberal party in order to govern. And so what we are seeing now is like a confirmation of this, because without a systemic rival like the workers' movement or the socialist movement ages ago, liberalism is bound to evolve in this way, because the essence, the real face of liberalism is the limitation of voting rights, it's like a tool to share the recognition, the Hegelian term, among the elite. Like liberalism is basically a set of rule to share that among the elite. So it was forced to adapt and to become more democratic, but now it doesn't need to be, because there is no threat outside of it.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely clear, and it's something that we discussed in our previous discussions that we've had on this podcast on Italy. But I thought we would maybe turn now to the more specific pictures of what kind of government this will give Italy and what they will face as constraints. So this election has given the right enough of a vote to secure a pretty stable majority. I think it got 44% of the vote overall. That's combined. That's the Fratelli d'Italia together with Forza Italia and together with the Lega. And I think maybe some other small parties alongside, and but that gives them 59% of the seats, which is a pretty comfortable majority, and that's kind of different and looks to provide maybe more stability to the Italian government than previous Italian governments have faced, which have often, not very regularly not seen out their full term. Why have they managed this majority? I understand that there's been a change to the electoral law, and how do you see that playing out? Do you think that this government will prove more stable or longer lasting than a lot of the very short-lived previous governments?
Well, they managed to do this because the changes on of the electoral law, basically it was something that was born out of the populist revolt in Italy. The populist revolt took the form of a rebellion against the political establishment, la casta. Politicians were considered corrupt, and having a lot of politicians was considered a waste of money. So they decided to reduce the number of parliamentarians, and this was something that was so widely accepted that we held a referendum for it, and the people overwhelmingly vote in favor of cutting in half the number of parliamentarians, and basically that's why you can see a very big majority right now, and we are seeing the political version of the concentration of wealth. We are seeing a concentration of political power by means of reducing the electoral representative bodies. So basically, the people wanted to punish the political casta, but they ended up punishing themselves. And I think that the question about how stable will be Meloni government has more to do with external factors than with internal factors, because basically this concentration of powers looks good for her, but who can predict how will she be able to manage the economic crisis and also the general crisis in which Italy is in.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I guess the internal, the internal questions or questions internal to the formation of her government, perhaps maybe less determining than the general context, which we're going to come to in a bit. But I did want to double back to something which I always want to talk about when it's elections, but I think it's incredibly important and people tend to gloss over it sometimes, but it's the question of turnout, which you've already mentioned. It was 64%, which is incredibly low, and I think a record for the Italian Second Republic, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah. I mean, that's huge. You've already said that it's basically the working class not turning out to vote. So I guess, I mean, I don't know. This is my judgment from the outside. Looking at it, there doesn't seem to be as much, oh my God, fascists in terms of the reporting on this from outside than there has been previously. I think I remember, with Salvini, there was much more hyperventilation about what this might lead to than with Meloni. I don't know, but I think at least that grasps onto something, maybe unknowingly, unwittingly, onto some kind of truth there, that basically that there hasn't been a sort of groundswell of rightist intent, but rather just continuing dejection. I mean, is that a characterization you agree with?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the low turnout is basically a very clear indication of the fact that the establishment is very short of options regarding how to get legitimacy for ruling the country. Like Meloni is the last card they can play. After that is entirely up for grabs. Like they know full well this, and also I think that this low turnout, it is exactly how the system is designed to function, because that is the general strategy was to generate depoliticization. Like in the 90s, they did that by forcing you to retreat in your private life and consume and so on. Right now, it's mostly like a transformation of democracy to a new form of Bonapartism, where you basically are a passive spectator, and you choose this leader or this other leader, or you can even abstain. But politics is very distant from your ordinary life.
Yeah, I don't want to be the second EU guy on this podcast, but it does seem like this is a trend that the Italian voters probably realize, like their options or their room for maneuver is pretty limited. Like the EU is this massive constraint on Italian democracy, and does it really matter? Like in some ways you could say it's surprising 2/3 bothered to come out in the first place, because it's like still a lot of the political room for maneuver is going to be constrained by the EU. Even the possibility, which the EU-backed technocrats could come in if things go south, as it were. So I mean, yeah, I mean that's not the only reason, but it does seem to me that it's going to continue, this turnout numbers declining until maybe somebody offers a possibility of life beyond the EU.
I think that what you just said is also something that they are fully aware of. Like the first moves of Giorgia Meloni has been to call Draghi and ask him for help to draft the new budget law, and also Draghi has called Macron, Scholz, and Ursula von der Leyen to guarantee for her. So I think that it is true that she has no room for maneuvering, but also I think that they are trying to experiment with mixing together a technocratic politics that is determined from Brussels, or with Draghi guaranteeing for the government, and also a populist charismatic leader that uses culture war stuff to entertain people in order to keep that legitimacy that they need to.
Yeah, I mean it's a standard pattern, isn't it? That you retreat to culture wars issues because anything more substantive, we have this external constraint, we can't really do anything about it, and so you're left with some pretty kind of politically concentrated options, to put it that way.
I had two specific questions about Meloni. I mean, one, her kind of concrete policies, particularly in kind of economic, social policy, welfare, and so on, are actually pretty right wing. I mean, this is a post-fascist party, but I mean, it's interesting that there is, unlike some other examples of populism, not even it seems kind of hinting towards a kind of more welfarist vision, which is something that, for example, Marine Le Pen does in France to some limited success, I think. But it's interesting that the Fratelli d'Italia don't seem to do that. I mean, they're kind of low tax. I think the first thing she plans on doing is cutting unemployment benefits, which are already pretty miserly. So it just seems to be very much an acceleration of a lot of what has already been going on economically.
Yeah, and also it's interesting the fact that unlike Marine Le Pen, she managed to get into to form a government. Like Giorgia Meloni is able to do something. So maybe the point we have to take from this is that there is a transition from right-wing populism that keeps trying to appeal to the working class using welfarist and other things like that, and a new kind of right-wing populist that doesn't care about the working class, but it basically betting that he can entertain the working class with culture wars and stuff, while it does very right-wing economic policies.
Great. No, I mean, that's a really, I think, important point, and it'd be interesting to explore it a little bit further. One thing which I actually wanted to ask specifically on this is, to what degree is Meloni and the Fratelli d'Italia more broadly, in terms of communicating, do they have a kind of no holds barred kind of approach to communicating, in which they only appeal to their base? They're not interested in trying to appeal to the mainstream, and are just kind of strengthening their base. I mean, this is something that you saw to a certain extent with Trump in certain periods, that you see with Bolsonaro, where he's uninterested in trying to win over new voters. He just wants to strengthen his base, which is of course important as well in a low turnout context, where you just need to make sure that you get your 20% or your 30% out strongly to the ballots, and you don't need to worry about winning over kind of middling voters, kind of who are floating voters, let's say. Does Meloni do the same, or does she try to do more of an establishment sort of appeal, like to a certain extent that Ben does? No.
She doesn't really try to communicate to her base. She's attempting to be like the next Berlusconi or the next Trump. She's trying to explore different formats. As I said, she was on TikTok with melons, joking on her name. So, but this is something that every Italian politician does. Like maybe only the Democratic Party doesn't do this kind of stunts.
Right, but she's trying to create a sort of speak, I guess, to the nation as a whole and represent the nation as a whole, rather than speak to her base. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think she has the political skills in any way to create a new sort of politics, or in some ways, I guess, keep herself in power and not fall prey to the same forces which have split apart every other kind of Italian government?
I think that she's definitely smarter and more experienced than Salvini. That was the last big name in the right coalition. And I don't know, just after the elections, a video surfaced where Berlusconi was caught saying that he wanted to be the kingmaker of the next government. But I don't really know if he will be able to do that, because he is not dealing with Salvini, which was basically a politically naive. He's dealing with Meloni, which basically is in politics since she was 15, and she has risen in a very different environment for her, being a woman. Like, she was the only woman in the youth organization of Alleanza Nazionale. So she is definitely a capable politician. She is able to maneuver. So I don't know. She will definitely have to be careful, because she is assuming government in a very difficult situation. But judging on the moves she is making, you can not rule out the possibility that she will last long, or she will last a decent amount of time.
I want to get to this wider situation in just a second, but I guess one final thing is, I mean, you point out that I guess Meloni is not actually something new, but she's an antica coata, which you might have to explain exactly what that means. But also, I mean, obviously, this is of interest to us on this podcast, as our evil patron saint is Silvio Berlusconi. So much so that, we like to consider ourselves up to this point the brothers of Italy. But now these fascists have come in. and taken what was ours, which I think
Jesus,
we're aggrieved.
That was terrible.
The brothers of Bunga, maybe Fratelli di Bunga, but probably not. Probably not the Italy brothers. Sounds like a bit like the Mario brothers, Mario and Luigi Mario.
Right.
Brothers of Italy is the first line of the Italian national anthem. That's why she chose that phrase. And also, it's interesting that she is doing the same kind of moves as Berlusconi. Berlusconi called this party Forza Italia, which was what you say at the stadium when the national team is playing. This is very, very similar.
It's the same sort of sloganeering and as a basis to create a kind of pretty flimsy politics on top of. So I guess there isn't anything particularly new, I guess, is what you're saying about Meloni. I mean, it's just a continuation along the same line.
I think that she is a continuation, but as I said, she is the last card the establishment can play. So we can already see what could come after. Like in the last election, we had some parties that ran to the right of Meloni, and not in terms of like openly neo-fascist parties, but in terms of parties that were trying to capture the rage of the impoverished middle class, and they were basically anti-liberal. Like one was called Italexit, which is a very explicit name, and another was called Sovereign and Popular Italy, which is another very explicit name. Basically, the promises of the populist revolt that were like taking back control, those have been like betrayed by Salvini, and probably they will be betrayed by Meloni. And after that, there is not really another wing of the ruling class that can assume power to betray these promises again.
That's fascinating. We're going to come on to a bit more of that in just a second, but I want to take the opportunity to say that if you're new to BungaCast, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening to us, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, or any of the smaller brands as well. And follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook to keep updated on new episodes and much more. We're at BungaCast everywhere. And if you do know us and like us, make sure you drop us a review wherever you get your podcasts. You might even consider giving us 5 stelle, or 5 stars, if you will. And just to give you a shout out for what's coming up, we have plenty more on Brazil's elections, the first round of which are taking place this Sunday. So Bunga Zone 2022 is continuing. We have a retrospective on Gorbachev as a 20th century figure, as well as kind of reflecting on what the 20th century was as it draws ever further away. And the second section of our 2022 reading club is drawing to a close. It will be concluding with a study on conspiracy theories. Are they growing? What do they say about our understanding of our own agency? And what are the boundaries of paranoia and skepticism? Getting back to it, Phil, we wanted to turn on to the question of Ukraine, about the energy crisis and so on. So take it away.
Yeah, so the energy crisis is, it's obviously we're talking on the day that the news just broke this morning about the attack on the Nord Stream infrastructure in the North Sea. And Italy is especially exposed to the energy crisis because it's so dependent on gas imports, especially from Russia. And what has been kind of very striking in the run-up to the Italian election was how vocal Meloni was about not only her support for the European Union, but also for NATO. And she recently tweeted at Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, encouraging him to stay strong and that he has Italy's and her government's full support. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about how her excuse me, sorry, still lingering effects of COVID. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about, because it's striking how, unlike some kind of national populists in Europe, Meloni has made explicit efforts to differentiate herself from Putin. And especially, I mean, and it's kind of, this was one of Silvio's famous, famous kind of characteristics, was also his proximity to Putin in the 2000s. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that. And also, perhaps the bigger question is, how badly is the energy crisis going to hit Italy? Do you think there'll be blackouts, or do you think that Italy will manage to get through the crisis with support for consumers and without kind of long-term damage to industry?
Well, I think that the first point, I think that Meloni is definitely Atlanticist, and that was also true for Salvini. Salvini was seen as being close to Putin, but he is not Putinist. Like he has distanced himself from Putin after the start of the war, and I think that he basically used this proximity to Putin, this as a way to shock the establishment and to present himself as an outsider. So it was part of his populist strategy, but it's not a real thing. And I think that for Meloni, we are seeing a different thing. Like she is basically part of a right-wing tradition that is really, you can call her fascist, but she's not fascist. She is more a Western supremacist. Like she is similar to the Azov Battalion or to Anders Breivik in that. Like they are not fascists, they are not Nazis. You can call them that, but this is mainly an aesthetics. They are really fighting to be cooptated in the family of Western nations. They are like the Azov Battalion are fighting for the cooptation of Ukraine nationalism into the West, and Meloni is something similar to this. So it's only normal that she supports Zelensky and she's against Putin. She is basically affirming herself as a member of the Western family. Why for the energy crisis? I don't really know. We heard today that our stockpiles of gas are enough to face the winter. And so probably we will see like we will see rationing. We will see like limited blackouts or something planned. But I don't think that this will be a big problem for the ordinary life in Italy. Maybe we should ask them the questions about how the Italian and European industry will face this, not just a shortage, but the rising price of gas, and how this will affect the industrialization of the continent.
Yeah. So do you have any thoughts on the effect on the Italian economy, on Italian industry?
We can already see that prices have been going up, but I think that it is still too early to see the real consequences.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was interesting. I think you had noted as well that the markets hardly responded to the election results. So maybe some of these difficulties are already priced in. And as regards what exactly this new Italian government will do, there isn't any real sense that it will do anything, quote unquote, disruptive from the perspective of markets.
Or people know that the EU has tools if things go in a difficult direction. So I'm being the EU guy again, but this could be another reason why markets don't mind, because Ursula can come along and put her finger on the scales and sort things out. So,
but I think markets were more shaken when Salvini came in. I mean, there was more uncertainty then, whereas with Meloni, there doesn't seem to be. So I don't know if that's entirely the explanation. But I mean, I think there obviously is a point to which the Meloni will not pursue any confrontation with the EU, I think, in a direct sense. So unless I'm wrong, what do you think, Mattia, and indeed Phil as well, for that matter?
Yeah, I think that she will not be disruptive towards the European Union, and she will basically align with with the current trends. I think that we should not see Meloni as an EU force, an anti-European force, but we should see her more like the Visegrad bloc. Like I think that is more. It's more possible that she will align to that bloc, and she will push like American interests and inside the European Union.
Right. And I mean, some have made the point, some on this podcast, in fact, made the point that actually the Fratelli d'Italia will actually in some ways strengthen the EU rather than weaken it. Phil?
I think, that's the logic of the situation. So, we've been used to kind of setting up these confrontations between these populist insurrections at the ballot box that are then squashed by the tools, which is to say that the European Central Bank basically can inflict tremendous punishment on any member of the Eurozone that offers any prospect of diverging from the line. And this is what happened essentially with the ousting of Berlusconi, and also with the installation of technocratic government, the Draghi technocratic governments. So the point being, right, that this is the kind of pattern up to now. But what is more likely, given the fact that Meloni and other populists have basically surrendered to Brussels, what is more likely is that their accommodation to Brussels and their accommodation to the European Central Bank means that they will help to legitimate the European Union. So they'll make the case for the European Union as a kind of a place where there is the possibility of cooperation between these nations, and that they will parade, the kind of cultural defenses. They'll talk of the culture wars in inverse proportion to their capacity to actually affect meaningful political or economic change within their countries. And so the effect overall will be that you'll have a re-legitimation of the EU, but not in terms of liberal technocracy, but rather in terms of national populism. So, I think that's kind of a likely direction of travel. I think also, though, it'll be more difficult for, I think, her dogged commitment to supporting NATO in Ukraine will be more difficult, I think, to sustain politically, especially if there is a very sharp energy crisis. I think that will be that will be difficult. And if this was a point made by a commentator in Compact magazine discussing the outcome of the election, where he said there was dead silence. There was kind of loud support and cheering for Meloni's speech, but when she finished the speech by rallying around Ukraine, there was very kind of little support for that from the crowd. So I think that is kind of, much more likely than a showdown with Brussels is going to be some kind of difficulty of having to support, having to continue to support NATO's policy in Ukraine when the lights start going off and the heating stops.
Yeah. Mattia, do you want to respond to that?
I agree with that assessment. Like I think that the most probable direction is that the European Union will turn into a bigger Visegrad, like the Hungarian option.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good moment to talk about what the effect of Fratelli government will be on Italy, because I think we spent a lot of time talking down the fear-mongering around some sort of, abrupt end to democracy or fascism or whatever. But I guess the reality of many governments like this is a continuing deterioration of state capacity, an attempt to rewrite history, especially with regard to Italy's fascist past, and the stimulation of kind of pointless culture wars, which only kind of deteriorate the social fabric further. I mean, is that something that you would see as being to put it in the most dumb way possible, the downside of a Meloni government? I mean, that is what the real risk that she represents, rather than some of the kind of grander claims.
Yeah, that is what will happen. Like we are already seeing it like playing out. Like she's positioning in a very conservative fashion on like family, on minorities. So she probably will pursue that kind of politics while being basically neoliberal on the economic side.
So I guess to finish this off, it'd be nice to discuss a little bit your book, or for you to tell us about it, about Interregno, and also to talk about the iconography project as a whole.
Well, my book, as I said before, it is about the darkest timeline. I try to use that concept, which is basically a meme nowadays, in order to explain the famous Gramsci quote about the Interregno, the ones about morbid phenomena that arise from the interregno between the death of the old order and the birth of the new order. And the book is basically about these phenomena. Like we have chapters about Taliban memes, or a chapter about the Netflixation of wars, like wars that become basically Netflix series. We are seeing this playing out in Ukraine in a very clear way. Like people is following the war from Twitter, and they are rooting for one team or the other. They basically are watching a TV show, and so the book is about this, and it is born out my experience with Iconografia, which is a quarterly print magazine about these kind of things. It tries to explore the weird and the aesthetics of the present. It is about the spirit of the times.
Yeah, I mean, I can add something. Having been in Milan for the launch of the book and meeting many of the readers of the magazine, I mean, my reflection, or part of the what I would contribute, was it was a very good discussion. But the sorts of readers of the journal itself and the book were kind of intimidatingly cool. Milan, I wouldn't say hipsters, because that has a negative connotation, but young people. And unlike events in Britain, everyone there was just listening more or less intently to what we on the panel had to say while smoking. And the venue was a kind
no
of
vaping at all.
No, the wow. Venue was a cultural urban beach, and so there was sand there, and it was a very cool venue, and everybody seemed to be really very much into the probably less so the translated comments that I made than the arguments of the book, and this idea, I think, of the interregnum, which it's almost become a cliche, this Gramsci quote in English now, that the crisis consists in the fact the old is dying and the new can't be born, and then you have all these morbid symptoms. But I think there's that is the right starting point, because the old is breaking down, is losing legitimacy. Like nobody is really there supporting neoliberalism, supporting capitalism, but there is no force to bring the new into play. So that's why I think the book and the journal are so capture that mood perfectly. And I think everyone I spoke to, at least, seemed to be avid supporters of the journal, and the book sold out in the event. So hopefully there'll be more book launch events and more chances for Italian listeners to buy the journal, at least.
We will do one for la fine della storia
Yeah.
in December.
Fantastic.
No,
Yeah,
that'd be
we're
fantastic,
looking forward to that. Italian listeners, get in touch. When we have more information, we will give you that information, and hopefully we can all meet up there together. But in the meantime, of course, you should check out Mattia's book. You should check out Iconografia if you read Italian, or at least pretend to, like I do. They do at the very least look very cool.
Alex, right? You're a contributor, in fact, of an essay on
I am
Bolsonaro being dead.
Bolsonaro and death, as well as him being dead and undead. That's right.
Our dream about every time Bolsonaro went to the hospital. One of the coolest things we did.
Yeah, with references to his colostomy bag, all that lovely kind of stuff. Anyway, so I think we will leave this here. Mattia, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, and we'll have to do this again very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mattia.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Ciao. That's Italian. Bring it in there. Right at the end.